Okay, I think we're ready to begin. What I wanted to do was go over the pre-writing worksheet for Essay 4, which is our argument research essay. This becomes our pre-writing, and then once you fill this in, then you can work on the template for the outline. Okay, so we're all going to do the same pre-writing worksheet. The outline is going to vary a little bit. Just to remind you that what we do is we find this in Blackboard in Unit 4, okay? And it'll be closer to the top, but you're looking for Getting Started on Essay 4 worksheet for the outline. This is the pre-writing worksheet and the outline. So for this assignment, I'm going to go over how to do that. This is in there. You can either copy paste it, download it, print it, type it in, but you bring it to class filled out where I can see it, and you do need to add your name up at the top, okay, and the date. The topic for this particular, it changes from semester to semester. The topic in which I'm recording this, we are wondering if the government should tax sugary drinks as a way to combat obesity. But one of my examples here has more to do with global warming and whether those carbon emissions should be regulated because of its believed impact on climate change. So whatever your topic is for this particular semester, you need to write or type that in first, and then at this point you should have done enough research and be familiar with the controversy to explain why people disagree. I mean, no one wants there to be obesity in a way that compromises people's health. So why is this issue of taxing coming up, and why are people disagreeing? So there's going to be two sides. Basically, you're kind of telling me what are the two sides on this issue, not just for or against. Obviously, that's the case, but the general views. And then number 3, what is your basic position? And for us, are you for the tax? Are you against the tax? It's not that you're for or against obesity or for or against climate change. It's what you are for or against within the particular controversy. So you're against taxing sugary drinks or you're for taxing sugary drinks. The most important thing is that you're not neutral. You have to take a side on this paper, and that's what you argue for. That's called your position. Moving on to number 4, then you craft a thesis statement, and what you're trying to do is find a way to put should wording and have a reason. You see the because word. So your statement starts out, the government should tax sugary drinks if you're for it, right? And then you list your kind of reasons why, because, you know, whatever you believe is the supporting reasons. If you're against the tax, then it starts out simply, the government should not tax sugary drinks, and then kind of explain your reason. And the reason has to be the one that your essay is going to prove. Okay. There could be an overview reason, basically that it doesn't work or that it would reduce obesity, that overview, but then you're going to have specific reasons. That's what number 5 is to help you come up with. Sort of a way of outlining a 3-point paragraph type of way to handle this. But any additional reasons you have, you may just believe it may not work, but kind of some subpoints to that. It won't work because it actually won't have impact on obesity, or it won't actually prohibit or reduce people from purchasing sugary drinks. It won't be effective that way. The taxing something is not a way of changing a behavior. For example, cigarette taxes have not stopped people from buying cigarettes. But I don't know, has it lowered lung cancer? I don't know. That's where you'd have the evidence that you've researched. So you've got to do a little bit of research before you can actually plug in these reasons. But you need to have more than just one overall reason. You have to have some subpoints. And I just put 3 blanks here. If you have more reasons, or if you only have 2, but you want to have more than, just the one overview. Number 6, we have to shift gears and start thinking about your audience here. The first 5 are thinking about you, your position on the topic, how you're going to approach it, what points you're going to try to make. And think about that for number 5, what points are you going to try to make? But they really need to be reasons that support your thesis. Number 6, thinking about your audience. Thinking about the fact that many of them may drink sugary drinks, even though they don't have a problem with obesity, are also your classmates who are studying the same topic but have different points of view. What are you going to have to explain for us to understand your points? Remember that our paragraph model is state, explain, and support, and that's what 5, 6, and 7 are all about. You have to state your reasons, state your points, and then you're going to have to explain them, and then you're going to have to support and prove them. And so this is laying out that sort of groundwork for that. It might be great if you could parallel it, point A, you got to have to explain this about point A, and this is what you're going to have to prove. You're going to have evidence for this. You have to explain how that is connected. But this kind of lays out a strategy, because effective argument writing is all about strategy. If you're going to be effective in persuading, then you're kind of doing a check-in. What support do you have? Well, if the article you evaluated for Essay 3 provides some good evidence and good credible support, then you've got that article, and you'll need to get some more, right? Maybe you found out it's okay, but it really doesn't provide enough evidence. When you look at number 7 and I'm going to have to prove this, or I'm going to have to prove that, I'm going to prove this other, and you look at the article that you have, you realize maybe you don't have all of that evidence. You're going to need to have at least 2 articles anyway just to complete the assignment. But what do you have so far? And it's not really about number of articles. It is really, what do you have enough evidence to support the points you're going to make? It may take you more than 2 articles. If you have a very short article and it may only have enough proof for one of your points, you may need to have 2 or 3 more. So it's a way of kind of checking in with what you have at this point, because you want to make sure that you've done enough research. So that's the pre-writing worksheet. You're filling that in and turning that in, and then you'll be taking that and building an outline. Now, this template is one of the most flexible templates that we have for the assignment so far, because it's about strategy. We talk about it some in the Chapter 14 integrity videos and lecture, that you have to tailor your strategy to the audience that you have. And in a more complex argument strategy class, we would have multiple, audience strategies. We would learn how to go from the hostile audience, which takes a completely different approach, it's mentioned in the book, to approach when most of your audience already agrees with you and just needs a little inspiration or reinforcement, but they don't need really convincing. What we've targeted, though, for our audience at the academic level is an open-minded audience who needs scientific evidence as proof. Okay, so that's our college, academic, reasonable audience that we're geared toward. With that in mind, you're going to have an introduction template that looks like what we've had, except that it's going to have some background on the controversy, and if there's anything recent or relevant with regard to your topic, you want to mention it there. You're going to have a thesis that could have and should have some reference to the opposing view, that some people think differently than you, but here is your position. So let me read you the sample one here that has to do with the general topic of climate change and regulating carbon emissions. Although some people dismiss climate change as a naturally occurring phenomenon, there's our opposing view, remember, because of our dependent clause, here's the claim we're making. The rise in carbon emissions contributing to current climate change is harming the environment and should be reduced through reforms and regulation. So we're arguing in this thesis that carbon emissions should be reduced through reform and regulation because they're contributing to climate change, and that contribution is harming the environment. So there's several things in the essay that I'm going to have to prove to convince my reader of that before they're going to buy into reducing it. And you'll have a similar thing to do when you are proposing any kind of change. Should be taxed, should be regulated, should be made illegal. That kind of proposal there, you're going to have that kind of strategy. If you're saying it should not be, then you're doing the counter. It's not contributing, it's not harming the environment, therefore it should not be reduced. And then you have to turn around and provide the same evidence. So you could change this completely by saying not. But whatever your claim and your position is, that's what you state. Now, background or explanation paragraph as needed, or a discussion of the problem. This is governed solely by what you believe your audience already knows. they do not already know that there's a problem, they're not going to buy into a solution. So you have to give some explanation on the problem, tie it to your claim. If you're talking about the problem of obesity, you've got to connect that a little bit to sugary drinks, but you really have to help us understand that obesity or climate change or legalized marijuana or whatever it is a real big problem, and why there should be a change or why things should not be changed. You know, there's a problem, but we shouldn't change. This isn't the solution that's going to work. After that, then you come up with your reasons. And sometimes if you're asking for a change, it would be a proposal for something to be done, a tax, a law, you know, something like that, some regulation. Now, I've given you like you could have 3 reasons instead. If you feel like you can discuss the problem adequately in the background up here in the introduction, then don't waste our time with a background problem, this paragraph here. It just kind of depends on how complicated it is and how familiar your audience is with the problem. If it's pretty well known, then that's a waste of time. And you just need to argue your points, which you have to state, explain, and provide cited support and proof of. Another option is handling and dealing with the opposing views. It would be a failure to ignore them completely. The paper comes across as just informational. It kind of doesn't really, it seems biased, right? Remember when we looked at Essay 3, if an article ignored other views, we kind of looked down on that as being biased and not reasonable. And so you want to kind of handle that in some ways. But where you put it is also a tricky strategy. You can put it at the beginning and say there's some people who think that we ought to do this, but here's all the reasons why we shouldn't. That's good if you are opposing a change. If you are saying we should do this, but people think we shouldn't, you know, it's not cut and dry. You could try it here. You just have to make sure you can strongly refute it. And I would say as a beginning argument essay writer, if you feel like you do have a good way of handling the opposition, then keep it at the bottom. If you're not sure, then put it near the front. Make sure you clearly indicate that this is what other people think, and then come in with, you know, your claim why, you know, for your position and why it should be followed, and then wrap that up and kind of reinforce that. So this has a lot more nuances. The first part is, you know, what does your audience already know? And then where do you put opposing views? You don't want to ignore them. And how strong do you feel about how you can deal with them in a logical way as to whether you put them up front or at the end? If you're not sure, put them closer to the front and then let the rest of your paper act as sort of the refuting of that, or your own view in opposition to theirs. All right, so that should be enough. I'll be checking these. You are filling this in. Follow the assignment calendar for your class to see if these are turned in together or if they are turned in separately, because it just depends on schedules. So check that, but that is how you do the worksheet, how it is what you do before you create the outline.